We live in an age of total exposure. Every thought can become a tweet. Every meal can become a photo. Every achievement, every relationship, every emotion can be broadcast to the world in seconds. The technology exists to make our entire lives visible, and most people have embraced this possibility with enthusiasm. They share their mornings, their workouts, their outfits, their opinions. They document vacations, celebrations, even mundane moments that would have once passed unnoticed. It's as if visibility has become proof of existence, as if what isn't shown didn't really happen. But in the midst of this cultural obsession with exposure, there exists a group of people who resist. They have the same access to technology, the same opportunities to share, but they choose not to. Their minds, their lives, their inner worlds remain largely invisible. And this invisibility isn't accidental. It's deliberate. It's chosen. It's protected. So why do some minds stay invisible in a world that shows everything? What psychological forces drive this choice? And what can Carl Jung, one of history's greatest explorers of the human psyche, teach us about the wisdom of remaining unseen? To understand this, we need to start with a fundamental concept in Jungian psychology, the tension between the individual and the collective. Jung believed that every person exists in a constant dance between these two forces. The collective represents society, culture, shared norms and expectations. It's the voice that tells us how to behave, what to value, how to present ourselves. The individual, on the other hand, represents your unique essence, your authentic self, the part of you that's different from everyone else. Psychological health, according to Jung, requires balancing these forces. You need connection to the collective, but you also need to maintain your individuality. And here's where it gets interesting. Social media has dramatically amplified the power of the collective. It creates echo chambers where certain ideas, aesthetics, and behaviors get reinforced constantly. It rewards conformity with likes and shares. It punishes deviation with silence or criticism. In this environment, maintaining your individuality becomes harder. The pressure to conform, to follow trends, to think and act like everyone else is enormous. People whose minds stay invisible have recognized this pressure, and they've consciously resisted it. They understand that participating in the constant performance of social media would require them to conform, to shape themselves according to collective expectations. And they've decided their individuality is too valuable to sacrifice. This resistance is what Jung called individuation, the process of becoming your true self, distinct from the collective. It's not about rejecting society entirely. It's about refusing to be absorbed by it, maintaining your unique identity, even when surrounded by pressure to conform. People who stay invisible are engaged in this process. They're protecting their individuality by limiting their exposure to collective influence, and they're preserving their mental autonomy by not allowing algorithms, trends, or public opinion to shape their thoughts and behaviors. This is a profound act of psychological self-preservation. Jung also spoke about what he called psychic energy, the finite mental and emotional resources each person has. Every interaction, every stimulus, every decision requires energy. And in the modern world, social media is one of the greatest consumers of this energy. Scrolling through feeds, comparing yourself to others, crafting posts, monitoring responses, managing your image, it all drains you. People whose minds stay invisible have made a crucial realization. Their psychic energy is too precious to waste on digital performance. They'd rather invest it in things that genuinely nourish them. Deep relationships, creative work, learning, personal growth, or simply experiencing life without the need to document it. This isn't laziness or disengagement, it's wisdom. It's recognizing that you can't do everything, that choices must be made, and that how you spend your mental energy determines the quality of your life. By staying invisible, they're conserving their energy for what truly matters to them. They're living intentionally rather than reactively. They're making conscious choices rather than being swept along by cultural currents. There's also something profound happening with their relationship to the persona. The persona, in Jungian psychology, is the mask we wear in public, the version of ourselves we present to navigate social situations. It's not dishonest exactly, but it's selective. We show certain aspects of ourselves and hide others. On social media, the persona becomes highly visible and carefully curated. People spend enormous amounts of time and energy crafting their digital persona, choosing which photos to post, which thoughts to share, which version of themselves to present. But Jung warned about the dangers of over-identifying with the persona. When you spend too much time maintaining a public image, you risk losing touch with your authentic self. You start living for the applause rather than for your own truth. You become the mask rather than the person wearing it. People whose minds stay invisible have avoided this trap. They haven't rejected the persona entirely. We all need some level of social adaptation, but they've refused to let it dominate their lives. They understand that their authentic self is more important than their public image, and they've chosen to prioritize inner authenticity over outer performance. This choice reflects a deep level of self-awareness. They know who they are beneath the mask. They've spent time in introspection, in self-examination, in honest self-assessment. And because they know themselves so well, they don't need external validation to confirm their identity. This self-knowledge is the foundation of psychological independence. When you know yourself from within, you don't need others to tell you who you are. You don't need likes to confirm your worth. You don't need comments to validate your experiences. You simply know from a deep internal place what's true for you. And this knowing creates a powerful kind of freedom. You can make choices based on your own values rather than others' opinions. You can live according to your own truth rather than collective expectations. You can exist quietly, privately, authentically, without needing the world's permission or approval. Jung believed that this kind of psychological independence was essential for individuation. You can't become your true self if you're constantly looking to others for validation. You need to develop an inner authority, a stable sense of self that doesn't depend on external feedback. People whose minds stay invisible have developed this inner authority, and it's precisely this inner strength that allows them to resist the cultural pressure to be constantly visible. Another crucial aspect of why some minds stay invisible involves Jung's concept of the shadow. The shadow represents all the parts of ourselves we'd rather not acknowledge, the traits we're ashamed of, the emotions we suppress, the aspects of our personality that don't fit our idealized self-image. On social media, the shadow is almost completely absent. People curate their lives to show only the positive, the successful, the happy. Every post is filtered, literally and metaphorically, to present the best possible version of reality. But Jung believed that psychological health requires integrating the shadow, acknowledging and accepting all parts of yourself, including the uncomfortable ones. When you deny your shadow, it doesn't disappear. It grows stronger in the darkness, eventually manifesting in destructive ways. People whose minds stay invisible often have a more honest relationship with their shadow. They understand that life includes struggle, failure, pain, and imperfection, and they're not willing to pretend otherwise just to maintain a perfect public image. By staying invisible, they protect their ability to be fully human, to have bad days without documenting them, to make mistakes without an audience, to feel negative emotions without needing to spin them into inspirational content. This wholeness, this integration of light and shadow, is what Jung considered essential for psychological maturity. They're not hiding their shadow out of shame. They're protecting it from the distorting effects of public exposure. They understand that some aspects of the human experience are too complex, too nuanced, too personal to be reduced to a post, and they'd rather live authentically in private than perform happiness in public. This choice reflects a deep respect for the full spectrum of human experience, a refusal to participate in the collective delusion that life should always look perfect. There's also something significant happening with their relationship to time and presence. Jung believed that modern society suffers from a loss of connection to the present moment, that we're constantly pulled into the past or future, rarely fully inhabiting the now. Social media has intensified this problem. When you're constantly thinking about how to document your experiences, you're not fully present in them. You're already one step removed, thinking about angles, captions, how the moment will look to others. People whose minds stay invisible have reclaimed their presence. Without the need to document everything, they can be completely absorbed in their experiences. They can have a conversation without thinking about how to share it later. They can witness beauty without immediately reaching for their phone. They can feel emotions fully without analyzing how to express them publicly. This presence, this complete immersion in the moment, is something Jung considered sacred. It's where real life happens, where genuine experiences unfold, where authentic transformation occurs. By choosing invisibility, these individuals are choosing presence over performance. They're deciding that experiencing life directly is more valuable than broadcasting it, and in doing so, they're accessing a depth of experience that's increasingly rare in our distracted, documented world. Jung also understood the importance of solitude for psychological development. He believed that time alone, away from social demands and collective pressures, was essential for connecting with the deeper layers of the psyche. In solitude, you can hear the quiet voice of your authentic self. You can process experiences without external input. You can think your own thoughts rather than absorbing others' opinions. People whose minds stay invisible often have a profound appreciation for solitude. They don't view being alone as lonely or sad. They see it as necessary, nourishing, even sacred. In a world that constantly demands social engagement, they've carved out space for themselves. They've protected their right to be alone with their thoughts, to sit in silence, to exist without needing to explain or justify themselves to anyone. This comfort with solitude sets them apart in a culture that often equates constant connection with health and happiness. But Jung would argue that these individuals have discovered something most people miss, that the richest insights, the deepest transformations, the most meaningful experiences often happen in silence, in privacy, in the unseen depths of your own consciousness. By staying invisible, they're honoring this truth. They're creating the conditions for genuine psychological growth. There's also a fascinating dimension related to what Jung called the self, with a capital S. This isn't the everyday ego or personality. The self, in Jungian psychology, is the totality of who you are, conscious and unconscious, known and unknown, the deepest center of your being. The self doesn't seek validation because it already knows its own worth. It doesn't need to be seen to exist. It simply is, complete and whole in itself. People whose minds stay invisible often have a strong connection to this deeper self. They've moved beyond the ego's need for recognition and approval. They've discovered an internal source of worth that doesn't depend on external feedback. This connection to the self creates a powerful stability. When your sense of value comes from within, you're not shaken by others' opinions. You don't need constant reassurance. You don't measure your worth by likes or followers. You simply know from a deep internal place that you matter, that your life has meaning, that you're enough exactly as you are. Jung believed that connecting with the self was the ultimate goal of psychological development. It's what he meant by individuation, becoming whole, becoming your truest self. And it requires turning inward, away from the collective noise, toward the quiet center of your own being. People who stay invisible are making this inward turn. They're prioritizing their relationship with themselves over their relationship with the digital crowd. And in doing so, they're accessing a depth of self-knowledge and inner peace that remains elusive to those caught in the cycle of constant performance. Let's also consider the role of boundaries. Jung believed that healthy individuals have clear psychological boundaries. They know where they end and others begin. They understand what's theirs to carry and what belongs to someone else. Social media erodes these boundaries. It creates a sense that everyone has access to everyone, that we should all be available, visible, responsive at all times. It blurs the line between public and private, between inner and outer. People whose minds stay invisible have recognized this boundary violation, and they've responded by establishing firm limits. They've decided that their inner world, their experiences, their thoughts and feelings are theirs alone, not public property. This isn't selfishness, it's self-respect. It's understanding that you have a right to privacy, to maintain parts of yourself that are sacred, protected, known only to you and perhaps a few trusted others. By staying invisible, they're creating a protective container for their psyche. One of the most profound reasons some minds stay invisible relates to Jung's understanding of individuation in the digital age. Individuation, as Jung described it, is the lifelong process of becoming your true self, integrating all aspects of your personality, conscious and unconscious, into a unified whole. This process requires turning inward, confronting your shadow, wrestling with uncomfortable truths about yourself, and ultimately finding your unique center, independent of collective pressures and external expectations. But here's the challenge. The digital world constantly pulls our attention outward. It bombards us with external stimuli, rewards conformity, and makes individuation exponentially more difficult. Social media platforms are designed to keep you engaged with others' lives, others' opinions, others' expectations. Every scroll, every like, every notification pulls you away from yourself and toward the collective. People whose minds stay invisible have recognized this fundamental incompatibility between social media and genuine psychological development. They understand that if they want to individuate, if they want to become their authentic selves, they need to limit their exposure to the constant outward pull of digital platforms. By staying invisible, they're creating the psychological space necessary for genuine self-discovery. They're protecting their ability to turn inward, to reflect, to confront their own shadow without the distraction of public performance. Jung believed that individuation requires stripping off what he called the false wrappings of the persona and resisting the suggestive power of collective influences. In modern terms, this means not identifying with your carefully curated online image and not being dominated by the trends, opinions, and archetypal forces that sweep through social media. People who stay invisible are actively engaged in this work. They're refusing to let their identity be shaped by external forces. They're developing an internal sense of self that remains stable regardless of what's trending or what others think. There's also a crucial dimension related to what Jung called the collective unconscious. Jung believed that beneath our individual consciousness lies a shared layer of human experience, universal patterns and symbols that connect all of humanity. Social media has made the collective unconscious more visible and immediate than ever before. We can now see, in real time, the fears, desires, anxieties, and archetypes that move through masses of people. The problem is that this constant exposure to the collective can overwhelm the individual. When you're constantly consuming others' thoughts, feelings, and experiences, it becomes nearly impossible to distinguish what's yours from what's theirs. You start absorbing collective emotions, adopting collective opinions, losing your individual voice in the noise of the crowd. Jung warned extensively about this danger. He witnessed how people in masses could fall under the sway of archetypal forces, losing their individual consciousness and becoming possessed by collective patterns. He analyzed historical movements where entire populations were gripped by mythic images that bypassed individual rationality. People whose minds stay invisible have developed what Jung would call consciousness about these collective forces. They recognize when an emotion or belief sweeping over them isn't entirely their own, but rather a collective wave. By stepping back from social media, they create distance from these forces. They gain the autonomy to think their own thoughts, feel their own feelings, and develop their own perspectives rather than being swept along by collective currents. This consciousness, this ability to separate yourself from the mass while remaining connected to humanity, is what Jung considered essential for psychological health. Interestingly, Jung also believed that genuine individuation doesn't lead to isolation. Paradoxically, becoming more fully yourself enables deeper connection with others. When you've done the work of integrating your shadow, you stop projecting it onto others and can see them more clearly. When you've found your own center, you don't need others to complete you, which allows for genuine intimacy rather than desperate dependency. People who stay invisible often exemplify this paradox. By withdrawing from shallow digital connections, they create space for deeper, more authentic relationships. They save their vulnerability for people they trust, for contexts where genuine connection is possible. Their relationships aren't measured in followers or likes, but in actual intimacy, understanding, and mutual growth. Jung would say these individuals have learned that true connection happens soul to soul, not screen to screen. There's also something significant happening with their relationship to meaning. Jung believed that individuation wasn't just about psychological health, but fundamentally about meaning. In a secular age where traditional sources of meaning have eroded, many people turn to social media for validation, purpose, and a sense of mattering. But this external source of meaning is unstable, dependent on others' reactions, subject to the whims of algorithms and trends. People whose minds stay invisible have found meaning internally. They've developed what Jung called a relationship with the self, the deepest center of being that doesn't depend on external validation. This internal source of meaning remains stable, regardless of how many people see them or approve of them. They know their life has value, not because others recognize it, but because they can feel it from within. This shift from external to internal meaning is transformative. It frees you from the endless cycle of seeking validation. It allows you to make choices based on what feels meaningful to you, rather than what will impress others. It creates a sense of purpose that can't be shaken by changes in your social media metrics or public visibility. Jung also understood that the process of becoming whole requires what he called holding the tension of opposites. Life presents us with contradictions, parts of ourselves that seem incompatible, desires that conflict. Most people try to resolve this tension by choosing one side and rejecting the other. But Jung believed that psychological maturity comes from holding both sides, allowing the tension to exist until something new emerges from it. People who stay invisible are often comfortable with this kind of tension. They can hold the paradox of being both connected and solitary, both part of society and distinct from it, both engaged with the world and protective of their inner life. They don't need to resolve everything into a simple, shareable narrative. They can live with complexity, ambiguity, and contradiction. This capacity to tolerate tension is rare in a culture that demands clear positions, simple answers, and performative certainty. But it's essential for genuine psychological development. By staying invisible, these individuals protect their ability to live with nuance, to change their minds, to hold multiple truths simultaneously without needing to broadcast a consistent persona. Perhaps the most profound reason some minds stay invisible in a world that shows everything is their understanding of what Jung would call spiritual emptiness and the search for meaning. Jung believed that addiction, in all its forms, isn't simply a matter of weak willpower or brain chemistry. It's fundamentally a spiritual crisis, an attempt to fill an inner void that has no other outlet. In his famous correspondence with Bill Wilson, co-founder of Alcoholics Anonymous, Jung wrote that the craving for alcohol was actually the soul's thirst for wholeness, expressed in Latin as spiritus contra spiritum, spirit against spirits. Social media, in many ways, has become the modern equivalent of this spiritual crisis. People scroll endlessly, not because the content is particularly satisfying, but because they're trying to fill something, a need for connection, for meaning, for a sense that they matter. The validation of likes and comments provides a temporary relief, a brief sense that someone sees you, that you exist in others' awareness. But this relief is fleeting, and soon you need another hit, another post, another notification. People whose minds stay invisible have recognized this addictive pattern and consciously stepped away from it. They understand that social media exploits what Jung called the shadow, the unconscious needs and wounds we haven't fully acknowledged. The algorithms are designed to trigger specific psychological vulnerabilities, feeding us content that keeps us engaged by activating our deepest insecurities, our fears of missing out, our need for belonging, our desire to be seen as valuable. These individuals have done the psychological work to understand their own shadows. They've identified the wounds that social media would exploit, the need for validation, the fear of insignificance, the craving for connection, and they've chosen to address these needs in healthier ways, rather than allowing platforms to manipulate them. This is what Jung meant by making the unconscious conscious. When you're aware of your vulnerabilities, they lose their power over you. You can choose how to respond rather than being driven by unconscious compulsions. There's also a crucial understanding about what Jung called the spiritual dimension of recovery and wholeness. Jung believed that true healing from any compulsive pattern requires more than behavioral change. It requires a fundamental transformation of consciousness, a reconnection with something larger than yourself, whether you call it the self, the divine, or simply a sense of meaning and purpose. People who stay invisible often have this deeper orientation. They're not just avoiding social media, they're actively cultivating a spiritual or psychological practice that provides genuine nourishment. They meditate, they create, they spend time in nature, they engage in deep conversations, they read, they reflect. They've found sources of meaning that don't depend on external validation. This is why their invisibility doesn't feel like deprivation. It feels like liberation. They're not missing out on social media because they've found something far more satisfying, a genuine connection with themselves, with others, with life itself. Jung also understood what modern addiction specialists call the difference between stopping the behavior and actually healing the underlying wound. You can quit social media, but if you haven't addressed the psychological needs it was filling, you'll simply find another compulsion, another way to avoid facing yourself. People who successfully stay invisible have done this deeper work. They've asked themselves, what was I really looking for when I checked social media compulsively? Was it connection? Then they've built real relationships. Was it validation? Then they've developed internal self-worth. Was it escape from boredom or pain? Then they've learned to sit with discomfort, to be present with difficult emotions without needing to numb them. This is the process Jung called individuation, but in modern recovery language, it's about healing the root cause rather than just managing symptoms. There's also a profound understanding of what it means to live mythologically. Jung believed that humans need myths, not in the sense of false stories, but as psychological containers that give our suffering context and meaning. Social media offers a shallow mythology, the hero's journey of personal branding, the myth of constant happiness and success. But people who stay invisible have often found deeper myths to live by. They see their lives as journeys of transformation, descents into darkness, followed by returns with wisdom, struggles that forge character rather than failures to be hidden. This mythological perspective allows them to embrace the full spectrum of human experience, the descents as well as the ascents, the darkness as well as the light. They understand that suffering has a rhythm, that difficult periods aren't signs of failure, but natural phases of a larger pattern. This wisdom protects them from the tyranny of constant positivity that social media demands. Jung also spoke about what he called the porous ego, an ego strong enough to remain stable, but flexible enough to allow unconscious contents to emerge without being overwhelmed. Social media encourages the opposite, a rigid ego that must maintain a consistent image, that can't admit doubt or vulnerability without spinning it into inspirational content. People who stay invisible are developing this porous quality. They can acknowledge when they don't have answers. They can sit with ambiguity. They can change their minds without needing to announce and justify it publicly. This psychological flexibility is essential for genuine growth, but it's nearly impossible to develop when you're constantly performing for an audience. Finally, there's something profound about understanding that invisibility itself can be a form of presence. Jung believed that the most important work happens in the unseen places, in the depths of the psyche, in the quiet moments when transformation occurs beneath the surface of awareness. People who stay invisible understand this. They know that not everything needs to be witnessed to be real, that private victories are just as valid as public ones, that internal transformation is more important than external recognition. They've learned that you can be deeply engaged with life, fully present, actively growing and contributing without broadcasting any of it. This is perhaps the ultimate wisdom, that your value doesn't depend on being seen, that your life has meaning regardless of who witnesses it, that you can exist fully, authentically, and purposefully in the quiet spaces where genuine transformation occurs. In the end, some minds stay invisible not because they're afraid of the world, but because they've found something more valuable than visibility. They've discovered that true psychological health, genuine spiritual wholeness, and authentic individuation require protecting your inner life from the constant demands of performance. They've learned that in a world obsessed with showing everything, the greatest act of wisdom is choosing what to keep sacred, what to protect, what to allow to develop in darkness before bringing it into light. And they've realized that the richest, most meaningful life isn't necessarily the most visible one, but the one lived with intention, depth, and quiet courage.